The neural tube is a hollow structure which becomes segmented at first in the cranial part. In the first stage we got 3 brain vesicles: the prosencephalon, the mesencephalon, and the rhombencephalon. So if this is the cranial or rostral direction, the most anterior of these vesicles is the prosencephalon, followed by the mesencephalon, and by the third vesicle called rhombencephalon. This is the stage of the 3 brain vesicles. However, more vesicles will be formed. In this lateral view, we will see that the prosencephalon will divide into telencephalon and diencephalon. Then we got the mesencephalon, which becomes not divided into more parts. And then we got the ventral pons, then the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata, and then the spinal cord. So this is the lateral view, right? As was the previous one. And the prosencephalon is divided into the telencephalon, and diencephalon, the mesencephalon stays as a mesencephalon, and the rhombencephalon is divided into a so-called metencephalon, that will give rise to the pons and cerebellum, and the second part of rhombencephalon is called the myelencephalon. Which becomes the medulla oblongata. That is followed by the spinal cord. So this is the stage of 5 brain vesicles. If we choose the dorsal view of the same situation, we will notice that the telencephalon becomes subdivided into 2 hemispheres. Then we got the diencephalon, from which laterally the optic nerves are growing on each side, ending with the optic cups, which will be the retina. Okay. Then we got the mesencephalon with the aqueduct, and the structures derived from the Rhombencephalon, named after this rhombic shape of the future fourth brain ventricle, and the oblongata and the spinal cord. So if we correlate these two views, this is the telencephalon with two hemispheres. Inside we got the lateral ventricles. This is the diencephalon here with the optic stalk that will become the second cranial nerve, the optic nerve. At the end there is an optic cup that will become the retina once. And we got the third ventricle here, third brain ventricle, because it's a hollow tube, right? Modified, but still a hollow tube. Then we got the mesencephalon, and here is the pons. And as we see only the bottom of the Rhombencephalon, we don't see the cerebellum that has been like removed or transparent. Here is the medulla oblongata and the spinal cord. On the level of the Rhombencephalon, two more structures appear. They are also invaginated from the surface ectoderm. This is the autocyst or otic vesicle that will become the membranaceous labyrinth of the inner ear. All these structures drawn in blue come from the neuroectoderm. If we consider something like a general structure of this neurotube, we can see that some functions are dedicated to some regions. If this is the dorsal ectoderm, and here is a cross-section through an idealized neural tube, the right and left half are connected dorsally with a roof plate and ventrally with a floor plate. Ventrally. Then we can see that this part, the more dorsal one, which is called the alar plate, this becomes the sensory part of the tube, while the more ventral one, called the basal plate, will become the motor part, which is well preserved in the spinal cord, but also in some regions of the medulla oblongata, although modified by future movements and development. This groove is called sulcus limitans, and the sensory part could be in more detail divided into somatosensitive region, which is the most dorsal one, and viscerosensitive, while the motor part is visceromotor, and the most ventral is the somatic. Region. We should not forget the neural crest here on both sides of the neural tube, but it will be explained in a separate scheme. In the brain region, the sensory part hosts also special senses. Namely from the 5th, 7th, 9th and 10th cranial nerves. While the motor part contains the medial and lateral somatomotor nuclei, of cranial nerves, and also visceromotor nuclei of the cranial parasympathetic nerves, such as the 3rd, 7th, 9th and 10th cranial nerves.